All right. Well, welcome to the 1776 Syndicate call. Thanks for tuning in. If you're live on the call tonight, we appreciate you being here. If you're listening to this afterwards, as you know, these videos live a lifetime on our website as well as on our YouTube channel. And we've got some announcements coming up here in the next couple of weeks. We're transitioning some of our resources to make them more available to candidates and people that are running for office as we head into 2023. So keep an eye out for some exciting announcements. Also, if this has been shared with you, feel free to sign up for our email blast so you don't miss a guest. We also have some more exciting guests coming up in the near future and off into 2023. And if you're curious, we just went through this big election, midterms, a lot of excitement around the country, a lot of excitement here in Montana, and I hope everybody around the country is happy with their results. I know there's been some disappointments. But if you're curious what our push is going to be next year, I know it might feel like an off year for elections. Well, our two big push points right now are going to be school board elections, which happen here in Montana every year. And I know around the country, they've got infrequent or frequent elections for school boards, as well as we're looking at the judges in our state and around the country. So we do have a continued push, and we appreciate everybody's involvement with this syndicate and everything that you're doing. So I want to thank you for that. All right. Well, let me introduce tonight's guest. I've got Ron Catlett on the line tonight here with us live. And I want to read his bio, but I want to start by saying, as long as I've been involved in my community with some type of political environment, Ron has been there. Seems like he's at every meeting or he's a part of something, and he gives his time, energy, relentlessly, and I'm just thrilled that he's here tonight, as busy as he is. So as his bio reads, he grew up here in Kalispell, Montana. He's the son of a small business owner. He learned at an early age the bigger government almost usually creates more problems than it solves. Shocker there. He attended Montana State University in Bozeman and graduated with a history degree in 2010. Has been a part of multiple local and statewide political campaigns and worked as a political reporter covering the 2013 and 2015 Montana state legislative sessions. And for the last 6 years, he has worked in the office of Senator Daines, where he currently serves as regional director, overseeing offices in Kalispell, Great Falls, Helena, and Butte. And he still lives in Kalispell with his wife and 3 sons. And his free time enjoys hunting, hiking, reading, and a total baseball nerd. And by the way, like I said earlier, I don't know how he has time to do anything but the work he's doing, because he is running around and very, very involved in politics. So Ron, thank you for who you are, what you do, and thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, Jim and Rod, thank you so much for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here tonight, and I'm excited to get to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, and that's the importance of local elected officials and local elected offices. So
Well, I appreciate that. And again, we both appreciate you being here. Why don't I give you the floor, and you can take as much time as you need to talk about some of the things that we discussed in advance. And then we'll jump into some Q&A and bring some value to our members.
right. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So one of the things, so in my day job, and I guess before I start, I want to make clear, I do work for Senator Daines in his official office, in the official Senate office. I am speaking for myself tonight. I'm just, speaking as Ron Catlett here. So I'm not speaking for Senator Daines in this capacity. I get to share kind of my own thoughts and ideas. But working for Senator Daines and having the experiences that I have working in his official office, it's pretty interesting. Despite the fact that you work for the federal government, one of the things that I've learned very clearly in the last 6 years is the power and influence that local elected offices have. I like to say that I think our constitutional system has been wrongly inverted. We pay so much attention to Senate and House Representatives, the president, governor, when really it's local elected officials that have the most ability to impact our lives. Kind of some funny stories from my experiences. I've had probably about 50% of the calls that I get with issues to the senator's office are actually issues that are local issues. The senator has no jurisdiction over, which is people sometimes feel like I'm passing the buck, but it just is the reality. And sometimes it makes sense. I mean, we get calls about problems with child protective services, or Medicaid, or various things, and you can understand why a person might think that their U.S. senator is the right person to call, right? And so you try to direct them to the right people. But I also get people who complain about the dust on the road in front of their house, and you know noise complaints. I had one person. I just started working for the senator. I worked for about a week, and we got a call into the office from somebody who was super mad because apparently their neighbor was making a bunch of noise every night and having all these big parties, and the sheriff wasn't doing anything about it. So what could I do? Right. And so you just get that. But at the end of the day, like I'm saying, um, that's where local government has the jurisdiction and has the impact. And frankly, I'm glad about that. Right. I don't want the federal government being in control of the potholes outside my house. The federal government does enough and does it poorly, frankly, a lot of the time. And it's better to have local government where we are more accountable. And that's the thing. I think the great thing about local government is it is more accountable to the people. Certainly, you have way more as a citizen, a way quicker and more direct way of impacting your local government than you do the federal government or even your state government. Um, I mean, I think about our county commissioners here in Montana, mayors, Jim, you're on the school boards, sheriffs, county attorneys, county clerks who have control over our elections. I mean, these are really, really important positions, and they have a lot of influence. And as I said earlier, they really have the most direct way of impacting your life. And I think we learned this during all the COVID craziness, right? About all of a sudden, I mean, how many people, probably not that many people even knew what a health board was, a county health board was, until all of a sudden they're deciding, masking policies, and all that. And, here in Flathead County, I will say, I'll give a hat tip to our sheriff and our county attorney who protected us from a lot of the COVID craziness and mask mandates. We're very clear that, they're not going to enforce these things. These are not law enforcement issues. There are other people in other parts of Montana and the country at large who unfortunately did not have people in those positions with the same ideas and had a lot harder time, right? And there were a lot more restrictive policies in place that harmed our economy, bad for our schools, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's just really important for us to remember um, just why these positions exist and that they are important. And I know obviously the people listening on this call and who listen to this program are generally people who are involved, and who are considering running for office. And we absolutely need strong constitutionally minded conservative people in these roles. So if you are thinking about running, don't let yourself think that, oh, it's just a school board position. Oh, it's just, maybe a city council position. No, it's important. And, we really need good, strong leaders in those positions. And so one of the things that I also, in light of the importance of these races or these offices, I also want to talk about um, the importance of elected offices in the campaign world and in the political world for building political movements. When I was first coming up into politics, I started getting involved in politics right out of college, about 2012. And there was a major book that was published that got a lot of people's attention. And I will encourage anybody to read it if you want have some time and want something interesting to read in the political science space. But it's called The Blueprint: How the Democrats Won Colorado. And at that point, about 2012, Colorado, all of a sudden, over the course of about probably 4 to 6-ish years, had gone from a fairly reliably red state, fairly reliably Republican state, to a blue state, to a Democratic state. One of the, Mitt Romney, when he ran on the ran for president in 2012, lost Colorado, and it wasn't particularly close. Barack Obama won Colorado, and Democrats won all the statewide offices in Colorado. And it was a moment where this is a Western state, conservative ethos, pro-gun, pro-hunting, and somehow they were electing all these Democrats, and all of a sudden. And so the author of this book kind of went back and he kind of looked at, okay, how did they do this? How did they make this happen? And what's interesting about it is that it all started. There was a concerted effort by big money, Democratic donors, and political activists to target local elections, to target and particularly nonpartisan local elections, where you don't have the R versus D marker, right? And so what the Democrats did was they started recruiting progressives to run in school board races, to run in city council races, to run in county races. And they put all kinds of money behind these people. I mean, you have, it's interesting. You look back at some of the data and you have, school board people somehow raising thousands of dollars, county clerk races in these counties that are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, but, they're easy to bankroll. They don't take a lot of money to have a big impact in these races. And Democrats started winning. Now they started winning local races. Now, what you have when you start winning local races is you start having a bench that can run in higher offices. So suddenly, these Democrats who were winning city council races, they're suddenly winning school board elections, now are winning state legislative elections, state Senate seats. Now they're running for Colorado's congressional seats. And this wasn't, at this time, you also have an influx of people moving into Colorado from the left coast who are also pushing it left, but it all worked in tandem. So over the course of about 4 to 8 years, suddenly Colorado is turning blue, and Colorado is now a blue state. We've seen it. It went for President Biden in 2020. It has all its statewide elected officials are Democrats, 2 U.S. senators who are Democrat. I mean, it's got a couple of congressional seats that are still Republican. And then, you saw how close Lauren Boebert's run was there in her district in Colorado, which had previously been a very red district. The lesson there is that, we have to keep we have to keep focused on these local races and make sure that we're running, solid constitutional conservative people in these races, because this is how you build a bench, and it works in the inverse as well. Here in Montana, I think, we've seen Montana trend red the last 10 years. And that's because, I can say from experience, we've worked hard to put good people into local offices, to build a bench of people that can run for higher office. Obviously, places like Missoula and Bozeman, it's worked the other way. But what's happened in Great Falls? Great Falls was a pretty swing, if not lean blue, area for a long time. But over the years, through working and getting good candidates in office to run for office in local races, city councilors, school board members, now running for state legislature, and we're turning Cascade County red. Flathead County, we've done a really good job of holding the line. Flathead County's been a reliably conservative county for a long time. And because of the work that we do with our local conservative organizations, from the Republican Central Committee to various other organizations, We continue to recruit good candidates who can win elections now. But we have had some setbacks. I mean, Rod, you're on the call here. A couple of years ago, you sitting on the city council, lost to one of these people who got a bunch of big outside money all of a sudden pouring in, and now we have a very progressive, at least one very progressive member of the Kalispell City Council, and he's somebody that um, has we have to keep an eye on, and I'm sure who would love to run for higher office here, were he to get the chance. Matt Rosendale, he was somebody who, the congressman from Eastern Montana, he was somebody who, got talked into getting involved in local politics, right? And now he's our congressman. You know, Austin Knudsen, our attorney general, was the Roosevelt County attorney, right? Way in far northeast Montana. And then on the other side too, one of the things that I tell people, there's a certain gentleman, a farmer, who from a small town in north central Montana, who in the early 1990s got talked into running for school board. And he's now the senior United States Senator for Montana, John Tester. And that's how he got involved, right? And he got started. He was on the Big Sandy School Board for many years before he ran for state senate, and eventually got propelled him to the United States Senate, where we still have him today. So again, I just kind of keep coming back to, the importance of getting good people in these local offices in order to build a bench for good constitutional conservative candidates, but also to hold the line against the progressive movement, because they are very good at what they do, and that's the strategy that they want to try to use. I'll also say too, you know, data, the growth of data in our campaigns is also making this type of thing easier and easier to do, as far as targeting certain races. We have our data now. It's interesting, coming off of the 2022 election. I was working with Montana Republican Party on the couple days before the election on some of the data stuff, and then my experiences in going back 10 years on statewide elections is every election cycle we get better and better at targeting data, at accurately predicting how somebody's going to vote, or figuring out where Republican conservative leaning voters are, and that's important because, and that's both an opportunity and a threat. So if let's say I'm running in a very liberal school board seat, let's say I'm in Missoula, I'm running for a school board seat, I'm a conservative, and so I'm looking at, this is going to be a low turnout election, not that many people vote. So if I can target, okay, if my district is, this area is, if let's make it easy, if there's 1,000 voters in this school board district, and only 200 of them are conservative, there's 800 progressives, 200 conservatives, but I know that probably only about 150 voters are going to turn out. I can target these 200 conservative people in my district. I get them to turn out, right? I could win that seat. Now it works conversely as well, right? So, and the Democrats are doing the same thing, where they know, okay, in a conservative area, and again, I think this is using Rod's example, or even some of the liberals that we've seen get elected to school boards here. It's the same idea, right? It's you figure out who are your voters, and you target those voters. And again, the growth of data is making that easier and easier and easier to do, to know with greater accuracy, who are the people to target. So it's a pretty fascinating thing. And like I said, I think that's only going to get, more and more refined as time goes on. Also, in politics, I always tell people never underestimate the impact of name ID. Um, you know, it is really, really interesting looking at, some of the experiences. Rick Hill, who I don't know, Rod, you probably remember Rick. He ran for governor on the Republican ticket in 2012 for Montana, but he originally in the 90s was our congressman from 96 to 2000. He was the congressman from Montana, and he tells the story of when he was first running for office. Um, he was barnstorming the state. He was, going all over the place, going to every Lincoln Reagan dinner, every Republican Central Committee, Rotary, just trying to get out, trying to get in the newspaper as much as he could, get on the radio. And, he did a poll, and, he'd been doing this for several months, and he was shocked because he came back with 10% hard name ID. Just 10%. All the work he'd done was giving him just 10% hard name ID. And the lesson that he learned was, at the end of the day, obviously, TV advertising, when you're running a statewide campaign, TV advertising is huge. But the issue is really, like, if you can get a ground game in place where you actually get people out on the doors, handing out literature, talking to voters, that's where the name ID gets out there. So when you're running a local race, name ID, if people know your name, that's a huge, right. If they know your name, that's just a huge benefit to you. They're far more likely to vote for you if they just recognize your name, particularly in a nonpartisan race. You get out there, you drop literature, or you're getting out on doors, you're talking to people, and they remember you. And, it's kind of sad. You wish that people would be a little bit more informed about the decisions that they make. But that's just kind of the way it goes. So all that to say, that's just another way there's huge opportunity in these local elections. And that, if you're a constitutional conservative, we want to make sure we're taking advantage of those opportunities. But we also want to make sure we know, the progressives are trying to do the same thing. So we want to make sure that we're, keeping the importance and keeping focused on these elections to make sure that, the opposite isn't happening and that we're seeing progressives get elected to these races. So, yeah, so I mean, that's what I got. I guess I'll open myself up to, any questions or thoughts from you guys now. So.
Ron, thanks for that. And I'm salivating at the discussion because, I'm basically living what you just talked about. And I'll just share my story briefly for those that don't know it. Is when I moved here, it was a little bit before the Trump rally that we had in town with Trump Jr. and Ted Nugent and all these great people, and Danes was there. Thank you very much. And I met with John Fuller right after that, and I said, look, I want to get involved. My idea was, I'm going to help you raise some money or do some marketing or, knock on some doors. And John said, how about run for school board, which I did. And I got on the school board. And as you've suggested, the power of being an elected official at any level allows doors to open. In just 2 short years, I have a wonderful relationship with our state superintendent, and I've met every elected official from the top to the bottom, from the governor and including Senator Daines and whatnot, right? But what was interesting just the other day, 2 very well respected elected officials in the Senate and in the House here in Montana both asked me, what are you running for next? So like you said, it's a stepladder. And with that being said, Ron, how do we educate people on a larger scale how important it is to build this bench, right? Because I went looking for it, but how do we start to get that word out from an elevated level so they realize how important it is?
That's a good question. I wish I had, magic bullet or some, great answer to give, because I've been thinking about this for a long time. And, I think some of it from a 30,000 foot view, I really wish we could find a better way to have a better civic and government education starting in school, right? Like, um, I remember my own experience, and I was a pretty engaged kid. I was in speech and debate in high school. I was involved in some of the local politics. Um, but like high school government was one semester class that I took because I had to graduate, right? And I just did what I had to do to graduate, right? And unfortunately, that's the government education that a lot of kids get is just it's that one semester class they got to take to graduate. And I think it starts there. So I think what that does is people forget, number one, they forget most of what they learned in government class. And then it kind of becomes just a matter of what they're seeing on TV, TV ads and then, the media too, they get involved in the horse races of, national campaigns. And so it kind of creates this concept that it's all about the national level, or in some cases the state level if you have a prominent enough gubernatorial run or whatever. And so I really think it starts with I'd love to see us educate kids from the time of a bit more robust education and how our government works, how our constitutional system is supposed to work. I mean, I think if you brought our founding fathers back, if you brought James Madison to the United States in 2022, he'd be flabbergasted, and not in a good way, about the power of the federal government. You know, um, but then I think bringing it more down to a distilled view. I think we need, and I tell Senator Daines this myself in our conversations, and I talk with I've talked with the Governor Gianforte about this as well, and is we need these more prominent politicians themselves, like the governor, the senators, the representatives, to extol the virtues of running for local office and paying attention to local office. And then I think too um, we need activists out there to in our local political groups to really push local issues and the importance of local elected offices as well. I feel like we do that pretty well in Flathead County. We could certainly do it better. I think it helps. Again, we have a good opportunity after everything that happened with COVID in the last couple of years, because people kind of were rudely introduced to some of the powers, the local powers that folks have. So I think that's where I would go with that. But I think it's a tough battle, because I think right now our politics have become so nationalized. The media and everything makes it so much about the national level that it is sometimes hard to get the message across about the importance of the local levels.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to bounce around a little bit on the questions, because as you were speaking, I mean, it was top to bottom things that I would love to ask you. So this is going to be an equally hard question, because as you just suggested, it's hard to get people involved, and we need to find creative ways to get involved. However, when I look at the quality of some of the candidates that we have, not only that are running for office, but also some that are in office, we see the cause and effect of inexperienced people becoming elected, and then that's what we're left with, right? Especially when you look at small towns like what we have in Montana, as opposed to big towns that have been dealing with big city issues. All of a sudden, small town Montana is growing up, population is growing, and you've got elected officials that don't know how to deal with, the influx of change, right? So how do we communicate a message of, we want candidates, but we want candidates that could actually fill these roles instead of just a warm body?
Well, that's a really good question. And so, because you're right, I mean, I think there is a point where competence matters and experience matters. And so it's tough, right? Because I mean, again, there's a balance, right? Because Nancy Pelosi has a ton of experience, right?
Right.
Uh, but we need people with fresh ideas, particularly people with good conservative ideas. Um, but they need to be the right person for the job, right? And I think that's where you know um, some of the local political groups have some importance of influencing people to run for the right races. Um, and I think too, the elected officials themselves have, and I think again, we see this in here in Flathead County. I think the local electeds do a good job of recruiting other people to run for their offices who have some experience and who would be competent in the role. I think there's uh, an important role that, again, current elected officials have to make sure that they're trying to bring in good people as well. Um, and then, too, I mean, I think, as citizens, I think we need to be, willing to engage ourselves and try and ask questions of our elected officials and the people running to ascertain if they are qualified or not.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, it does come back to, there's no perfect answer, but it does come back to the voter, and who they're electing. But it's a good question, and again, it's a tough balance because again, you don't want to say, oh, you have to have all this experience, because you don't want people to be in there who are just stuck and are bad and won't leave. But you do want people who can do the job, certainly, and that's just how it is.
Okay, I'm going to ask kind of a multi-part question. I'll ask it all together. Then Rod, I'll get to you. Uh, um, first of all, I realize that you're here speaking as as an individual, not for Senator Daines. But I did want to ask, first of all, how is it to work for a senator that is in Congress working out of DC, and the pressure that comes with that? And kind of a follow-up to that is, how bad is the pressure for your boss in DC? Is he literally coming home, hitting his head against the wall, going, "I can't believe this place"? And finally, as citizens, what can we do to help his job be easier or give him more support?
That's a good question. To the first part of the question, it's fascinating the job that I get to do, and I'm very lucky. It's a privilege to get to serve the people of Montana in the way that I do, and I try not to take it for granted. Um, I enjoy my job for the most part. I get to go to a lot of cool meetings, meet a lot of cool people, be involved in a lot of interesting issues. Um, it is hard though. The federal government, again, kind of what I was saying earlier is, when you get into a job like this, you realize that, there are limitations to the power of the federal government, the power of Congress, which is good, right? And like I said, I've learned, okay, actually, the local electeds have a lot of power here, that they can certainly bring to bear. You know, Senator Daines himself, I really appreciate him as a person. He's really great to work for. Not every member of Congress um, is like him as far as just building a good culture, a good team. Even when we disagree, and I don't always, I mean, that's one of the things about working for an elected official. You don't always agree with them 100% of the time. But when I do disagree, being able to talk with him directly about that kind of stuff and process through it with him and understand where he's coming from, that's very good. Um, but Senator Daines, his view is, what's the highest and best use of my time? And he really, he goes back to DC every week, and but he does come back to Montana every weekend. He does not somebody who doesn't have a house in DC, doesn't set up shop there. He comes back every weekend, and you know, I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's definitely there is an entrenched system there in Washington D.C. That is very difficult. I mean, you call it the swamp, call it whatever you want to call it. That is difficult to navigate, right? And I think, I guess, and he's done it now he was in the House for 2 years. and now he's been in the Senate for 8 years. You know, I think he does his best. You know, he tries to build good relationships, you know, across, you know, not just with Republicans, but Democrats too. Find, you know, some common areas to pass legislation to benefit the people of Montana. You know, he comes from a business background, so you know his approach is very much, you know, hey, let's sit down and let's find some common ground here, and you know, work on some stuff that maybe we can work on together. Find some areas where we agree. Um, but you know, but it is hard. You know, the left in particular is going further and further and further down a path, I think, in his mind, where um, it's harder and harder to find common ground. You know, when you have Democrats pushing things now like, you know, full codification of Roe v. Wade, pushing statehood for the District of Columbia, um, you know, HR1, the federal takeover of elections. Um, it's just harder and harder to find that common ground. As far as what individual citizens can do, I mean, obviously vote. I mean, vote. I mean, that's cliche. I mean, it's vote for good people. But I will say too, I think a lot of the way to kind of claw some of this back is to remember and try and reemphasize the local and state levels. We are the United States of America. The federal government was founded by the states for the states. The federal government exists to serve the states, not the other way around. And we've gotten that way out of whack. And so I wish people, if people were to put more emphasis on local government, on state government, on clawing back powers from the federal government. Now that may mean, you know, California goes even further down the left wing rabbit hole. But you know, in Montana, we're able to, you know, protect ourselves and you know, govern ourselves more. I think that's more where I wish people would understand that idea better. And I think if we can claw back power from Washington D.C. and put it locally and put it in the states, that's really the way to, because we have this system in Washington D.C. that nobody likes. Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive, liberal, whatever. Nobody likes the swamp. But we keep and it drives me nuts because we keep wanting to put more and more power to them, right? It's like, oh, we need them to solve housing. Now we need them to solve healthcare. And you're just like, guys, like, I don't, you know, nobody likes what they're doing, but you're putting more and more power in their hands. And it's one of those things that I don't know, I get really frustrated by that attitude from people.
Great responses, Ron. And Senator Dane's going to be big trouble if you ever decide to run for office, because you're going to have my vote for sure. So, Rod, you had a question. Sorry, I put you on hold there, buddy, but go right ahead.
No, quite all right. Ron, first, thank you for your insights. And I will say, having been a public servant and having the opportunity to meet as a public servant with Senator Daines, both locally, you know, with the city council and the mayor, as well as going to Washington, D.C. and meeting with him there. I can say that the local people really do have the ear of their senators, of their congressmen. And that was definitely something that I appreciated about the entire process. And I think people really do need to understand that our senators and congressmen do in fact work for us if we speak to them. Right. They need to have that input. So I actually have a couple of questions, and first one's kind of more on the personal end, and then I'm going to get into some deeper stuff. But you know, in your bio, you know, you graduated with a degree in history, and so I want to know if the emphasis was like world history or U.S. history, number one, and if that influenced your interest in politics. And number two, you were a reporter for a while, and I am familiar with both older journalism standards as well as what we seem to have today. And if you could give me a little bit of take on that, and then I've got another question.
Okay.
For Kata.
Yeah. So my emphasis was in college was U.S. history. You got to choose kind of it was just a history degree generally, but you did get to choose an emphasis. Um, I really focused a lot. I loved the founding era, the forming of the Constitution, our concepts of government. Um, that really fascinated me. And then the other area I really came to love was the Cold War, the Cold War era, and from Truman to Reagan, and how that influenced world history. I wrote my senior thesis on actually on Gerald Ford, on the Gerald Ford administration, and his approach to the Cold War, and things like the Helsinki Accords, and the things that he was doing there. So that was kind of and that definitely did play into my interest in politics. I definitely, I always had an interest in politics going back to when I was a little kid. And I graduated from MSU. I had an interest in politics, and I actually, the way I got to know Steve Daines was I became friends with his daughter. His daughter Annie was at MSU the same time I was. Um, we were both involved with a campus ministry there called Campus Crusade for Christ, which you probably heard that name. And so I actually knew Steve Daines first as Annie's dad, which is kind of funny. And then I graduated, and he decided to run for Congress, and I had an opportunity to work on his campaign in 2012, and so I thought, hey, I'll work on this campaign. I'll do this, and I'll cut my teeth, and I'll see what this is like. And 10 years later, here I am. I'll also say too, I have a great deal of reverence, having studied our founding, for our founders and what they gave us and what they bequeathed us. And I want to see it preserved. I mean, I think that's, ultimately what it means to be a conservative, particularly in the American sense. Um, you know, the Constitution and the ideas that founded this country are ingenious. They've built the most powerful, prosperous society, nation in the history of the world. We've done more good for more people than any country in world history, and that's because of the foundation that they laid. And so for me, I wake up every day, and I want to be somebody who works to preserve that foundation. Um, and when I see people work to erode that and change that, that's when I get fired up. So that's my first answer to your question. My second answer, your second question about journalism. So so I worked for Steve Daines on his campaign, and I did a bunch of writing. And actually, what was interesting is after that, that's after the campaign is when I went to work as a reporter. And I covered the Montana legislative session. So I went out of politics into journalism for a time. And, one of the interesting things that I discovered in journalism, and I was a conservative in journalism, most of my colleagues were liberal. And I think most journalists, at least when I was covering politics, when I was doing my work in journalism, most journalists that I worked with really were not intending to be biased. The problem is that the newsroom was 90% liberal, and there wasn't a diversity of ideas in these newsrooms to counter liberal ideas. And again, it wasn't so much like these reporters were trying to be intentionally biased. It was just none of them were conservative, right? And so, if you're a journalist in Montana and you're already liberal, progressive, you're probably going to give John Tester a fairer shake than you're going to give Steve Daines or a Republican, the Republican Speaker of the House, right? And so that was one of my observations. It was not intentional so much as it was just a lack of diversity amongst reporters. And then, what we've seen now, unfortunately, in recent years, and I went back. So what's funny is I left journalism after a couple of years because I felt like I was too biased to be a good reporter. I I wanted to be more on the activist side of things and get back in politics. And so I did. And so I went from politics to journalism back into politics. Um, you know, what we're seeing now though, and this is disturbs me because I had to make that recognition. Okay, if I'm going to be a journalist, I need to try to be unbiased. What we're seeing now though is journalists aren't even trying to be unbiased anymore.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think, somewhat in response to President Trump, they've decided, well, we need to be the arbiters of truth here. And what they're doing is they're making it even worse. They're making it, by becoming even more overtly biased. Now the trust is eroding to such a degree to where, there's really nothing left as far as, mainstream journalism, mainstream reporting. Most people view it as biased one way or the other.
Right.
And it's a sad state of affairs.
Well, thanks for the insight on that, and thanks for being courageous and honest enough to say you recognized your bias and got out. Too bad others wouldn't follow suit. So,
Yep.
I have one observation I want to make, but first I want to ask you a question about data and trends. And in eastern Montana, we saw a lot of typically, especially around tribal areas, reservations that have started tipping red. And how can we capitalize on that from a local level? And what we're doing with 1776, how can we capitalize on that to help get a conservative congressman elected over Tester?
So, okay, so the reservation issue is fascinating, right? So one of the things that I'll put a little bit of a damper on people's excitement about the results we saw out of the congressional elections here in Montana. Turnout was way down from 2020, and that's because because a lot of folks in Indian country, I think, just didn't show up to vote this time. In 2020, when you have President Trump was not very popular in Indian country for various reasons. You had a very high profile Democrat and Steve Bullock on the ballot, at the top of the ballot in Montana. And, and Indian country turned out, pretty robustly. And Indian country tends to vote Democrat. For whatever reason, Monica Trinnell in the Western District, where you have Blackfeet and the CSKT reservations, Monica Trinnell just didn't excite people in Indian country. And so a lot of those folks, I think, just didn't vote. The same goes for Eastern Montana, where you didn't have a Democrat on the ballot with any chance of winning. So I'll say that I think a little bit of the brakes on some of the excitement. Now, I will say, I think we have some ways to make inroads into Indian country, and I think we are making some inroads into Indian country, because I think the progressive left-wing message doesn't really resonate. I mean, if you go and talk to the average person in Browning or Pablo or Harlem over on the east side, Hardin, they have a lot of the same concerns we do. They're talking about hay prices, cost of gas, they own guns, they hunt, they fish, very strong Christian presence on these. So there's ways to make inroads into Indian country. I think we're doing that. I think we have a ways to go though, because they voted Democratic for so long that it's just kind of the default. I think the Republican Party needs to do a little bit better job of affirming their unique identities, their identities as Blackfeet, as Crow. Sometimes I think in our efforts, we want to gloss over that, but they are very proud typically of being Blackfeet, very proud of being Salish or whatever the tribe may be. And I don't think that we should downplay that. And I think too, and yeah, like I said, recognizing those identities, um, and honoring that, I think is an important way, and acknowledging that there are some past, there are past, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a history there.
Transgression.
There's a history there that's very negative,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the way that people have been treated in Indian country in the history of the United States is not great, and recognizing some of that as well. So I think there are ways of making progress there if we have the right emphasis.
Thanks. Well, that's still good news. That's still a positive message.
Yep.
The last thing I want to mention is I'm so glad you brought out the book, the blueprint, and talking about the bench, because what I saw at the local level, 6 years on city council, almost all of the city boards, of which there are probably 12 or 15, I'd have to look them up, but there are a lot of advisory boards, even at the local city council level. And almost all of those, in my experience, because they would report to council on a regular basis, almost all of those were filled by left-leaning individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of them. So it's starting not just local level means local level. I mean, really at the starting point, which ties into your comment about understanding jurisdictions, the jurisdictional disputes and stuff. And we see that all the time. And there's nothing more embarrassing for me than to go to like a candidate forum and have somebody running for a county office who's talking about issues that aren't county related. It's embarrassing for me, for them. And that it's so important to start and know, so getting involved at the local level can not necessarily mean running for office, but just plain getting involved and sitting on a board and having that seat at the table. And that's where you start that learning curve to graduate up.
Yep.
And graduate up and graduate up. So
yep.
I'm so glad you brought that out. I think it's imperative that people understand the importance of those boards, because inevitably, when I was serving on council, we were going against the board recommendations because they were too liberal, and then they were mad at us for not following their recommendations and not knowing why. But they were stacked. They were stacked. So we need to combat it at that level as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I'll say, too, I know, talking to like our local county commissioners and others here, they're generally are looking for people to serve on boards. So that's another way. If you don't want to go through yourself the hassle of getting elected, maybe you're not quite ready for that step. If there's a local board you can serve on that you have some experience to bring to bear, whether it's a planning board or, library board or something like that, that's a great point, Rod. That might be a really great place to serve.
Ron, just being cognizant of our time and our hours coming to a close here, of one final question for you, and we'll wrap this thing up. But, being on the inside track with Senator Daines, and he was recently appointed to a great committee. So thank you for your PR announcement about that. What are your personal feelings about the future of this country and our opportunities as we gear up already for 2024 and what's happening in the government? Are you feeling secure? Are you feeling nervous? Do you know there's a lot of work to do? I mean, what are your thoughts? And we'll end with that for the night.
Yeah. I try to be optimistic. I'm generally an optimistic person. I'm a Christian. I believe ultimately God is in control. I've read the end of the book. God wins in the end. But I will say I'm more than at any other time in my life, I am concerned for the future of our country. I think we're going down some paths, and we have, the progressive movement in this country wants to take us down a path where a bigger government, of government telling you what you can do, and not just government, but the federal government telling you what to do. I think we can push back on that. I think we have opportunities to protect ourselves from that. But it is a time that makes me nervous. I am nervous. I'll put it that way. I'm nervous about the future. Again, I think we have opportunities that we need to seize to make sure that we keep this country grounded in the Constitution that we know and love. But if some elections don't go our way in coming times, if we don't have the citizenry, particularly younger people, come to a better understanding of how our government is supposed to work, I see us going down a more socialistic, big government path, and that definitely concerns me. And so I think 2024, and I don't like it when people say this is the most important election of our lifetime, but I will say 2024 is very important. If we don't win back the presidency and Biden or another Democrat has 4 more years, that's 4 more years down the wrong path. So it's very, very important that we win back the presidency in 2024. Hopefully, win back the Senate in 2024 as well. And winning, and that again, starting at the local level, getting good constitutional conservative people in office as well. We've got the fight for our country ahead of us. It just is what it is.
I really think that sets the tone for what you started the conversation with, and that was the local level. Our students are being influenced by progressive movements within their schools, and we need school board members to get elected, fight for our young minds, get them back where they need to be, help them understand history, the Constitution, how this country was founded. Because, as we look at some of the data that came out of these last elections, less than 2 weeks ago, younger audiences are voting far left. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And I do appreciate your candor, your honesty, and more importantly, your time, not only for being on our show, but what you're doing. I'll have to say personally, I've seen you and talked to you briefly around town, and I wish I'd spent a lot more time with you, understanding where you come from and who you are and what you represent. So I look forward to getting to know you better. And if you're listening to this call and you've enjoyed it, please share what we're doing here on the 1776 Syndicate. There's a lot of resources. We want to help you run for office, get elected, and win these seats. It's critical. We look forward to having you next week. And any comments, we'd love to hear from you. And again, Ron, thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, pleasure.